Welcome everyone to Top Tips for Running Successful Website Projects. I'm Justine Gonshaw, Head of Marketing for magLabs. Before I introduce our next speaker, Matt, just wanted to give apologies from Peter Neville of Concho Toro, who was going to be our speaker. Due to unforeseen circumstances, he can't join us today. He's very sorry. But you've got plenty of experience with myself and Matt Cooper, who's not only founder of magLabs Digital, so a website expert, he's also now MD of magLabs. So let's get started. I always like to start with a definition. It seems really obvious, but the definition of a website is a set of web pages that are under one domain, and they're usually produced or put together by a single person or a business. So it's a definition. Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about the purpose of your website. And I think it's really important to start here, because if you don't, you need to understand the purpose of your website. What's it trying to achieve? Is it trying to engage? Is it trying to interest, educate, or sell? Is your website simply a glorified brochure? And I think that used to be the purpose of many websites, not so much anymore. Are you trying to create an interactive experience, or are you trying to put some simple, easy steps to help people book a demo, make contact, or to buy from you? So I think that's the starting point. And understanding the starting point is really important, because then you need to take time to plot the user journey and understand the experience that visitors to your website are going to have. I think it's become more and more important over the past couple of years to really understand how people are going to go through your website, where you want to direct them, and how that's going to work. So what do you want the visitor to do? I think you need to map out the various scenarios and work out how you can influence website visitors to go to the places you want them to go and to end up where you want them to end up. So buying, or ringing you, or simply asking for a demo. And there may be multiple goals that you have. So you're going to have to plot each of those. And once you understand that, you can create a simple user journey. All this might sound really complicated, but it's not at all. You can create a simple user journey that helps to direct the visitor down the path you want to take them. But take a step back and think about who it is. What's the audience or audiences that you actually want to target? So all these things together are really, really important. So let's think about the website itself. Some websites overpower and confuse visitors with far too much information and lots of jargon that simply puts them off. Think about some of the engineering websites or consulting websites. It's all consulting and engineering speak. And if you're not an expert in that area, you're going to think, oh, boring, and you're going to switch off before you've even started. So really important not to do that. You have a few seconds, much like a phone call, to capture that visitor. And unless they're really, really looking for information and they're driven to that site for a particular reason, you've got to capture them and you've got to hold their attention and drive them to the places that you want them to go. Okay, so no one has time to wade through masses of text or really complex graphics. That's a no-no. It's going to switch them off too. I would say keep it simple, but not too simple. People aren't stupid either, so there is a fine balance. And I believe that too many gimmicks can also make visitors think they're being tricked into buying or doing something you want them to do. So not too many gimmicks either. There's a fine balance. Ideally, before you send your website live, you're going to test it. You're going to reach out to some customers who you've had for a long time, or some people in your industry, some close contacts, and get them to think about what's wrong with it. Are there any issues with what you've created? What do they think? And by testing it, you'll probably be able to refine it and improve it and make it even better. Okay, so moving on. Like we promised, there are a few key reasons why website projects fail or disappoint. They're not necessarily in the top order, but they are in some order. And I have to say from experience, I believe these are the key reasons as well. So let's look at poor planning. 40% of projects fail because of poor planning. And what does poor planning mean? Well, one scenario is it's time for a new website. I'll contact an agency and see what ideas they have. Great. Agency might have brilliant ideas, but do they know you? Not yet. And what are you bringing to the table? If nothing, it's probably going to be a problem. Or we'd like to modernize our website, make it more interactive. What things are working at the moment? It's the same sort of scenario. Not a lot of planning or thought has gone into it yet. Or I love this website, and you've looked at a website from a completely different industry, and you just want to replicate it for your industry. Well, probably not going to work. It shows you put a little bit of thought into it, but it's probably not going to work. So there are a few scenarios that relate to planning. I am going to cover planning in the next slide, so don't worry, I'm not just going to abandon it and give you a few random scenarios. The next and biggest issue is changing requirements. And I've seen this both as someone who's working on a website, who's managing the website as a go-between between client and agency, and from a client point of view, I've seen this as the biggest issue. It could be, when I say change, it could be different color scheme, different template, different graphics, user journey. And often, this happens when you've got key stakeholders and management teams who are sitting outside of the project, but they suddenly decide that the website should take a different path or have a completely different look and feel. And this is where it all gets very frustrating, and lots of time and money are wasted. So I think to avoid that, and I believe this can be avoided, I've seen instances where it has been avoided in the past. It can be done through better communication, empowerment, and marketing. After all, don't you pay marketing to be the expert in the area? Yes, but no. Management often think they know better, and sometimes they do, but the majority of times I would argue that they don't. That they just want to put their views, stamp their authority on the project, which doesn't always have the best outcome. Sorry to any management out there. I think joint project teams also help to avoid this, and setting key milestones with regular input from the project team and key stakeholders can also help to stop the changing requirements. I think we have to accept that, sometimes you get to a key milestone, and as a project team, you realize you need to make some minor changes. You need to adapt and tweak a bit. That isn't what I would call changing requirements. Changing requirements is a major change in a project. So if you've got the joint project team, if you've taken the information and the ideas from management and key stakeholders, and you communicate, you can probably overcome some of these issues and the change and the requirement for a changing requirement. Or how many requirements can I say in one sentence? Okay, moving on. Not enough budget. Well, this is a common problem, and I think we all want to get the best value for money, and we all accept that a website costs what it costs, and there are different prices, and for different prices you get sort of a different website, and money will only stretch so far. So I think if your ambitions are bigger than your budget, then your project is probably doomed to failure. So I think have an honest discussion with your supplier. Think about where you can compromise. Often you can achieve almost what you want through compromise, and then think about incremental improvements at a later stage. If you're happy with with what you have achieved, often those compromises have worked, and you actually don't need to do some of the other things that you thought were really essential. And then too many stakeholders as another big issue. That old expression, too many cooks spoils the broth, it really does ring true. I think it goes back to the changing requirements to some extent. But input and ideas are brilliant. They're really important. They're key. But seek this early on before the website project begins. And then keep the actual project team really small. A few key players from marketing, from the wider team. Not saying you want to keep it purely marketing, because you do want some of that input, but collating ideas and input early on, and then communicating the route you intend to go down. You can shoot down a lot of those more outlandish and wild suggestions that just aren't going to work, and then keep communicating. I don't think you can keep everyone happy all of the time. I think that's just, a fact of life, and certainly in a website project, because it is such a sort of subjective area. People like what they like and don't like what they don't like. But I think you can avoid some of those problems and disagreements. And I think the things around, the subjective areas around color and graphics and imagery, they're things that you probably can't overcome. As I said, people like what they like, but you can influence them if you can show that you're on brand, because after all, this is all about reflecting your brand and the user journey. And I think the most important thing is to consider that you're building a website mainly for your external audience, for customers, for potentially suppliers, and for new targets. Yes, you want your internal business to be happy, but it's mainly the external people and the rationale for building the website in the first place that's really important, that you should focus on. So try and avoid the navel gazing. The internal politics and wranglings are very time consuming. They're very wearing. So if you can focus externally and think about, what your customers and the people you're trying to attract think, then you're going in the right direction. I'm not saying avoid internal stakeholders, collate all the information, absorb it, distill it down, and then develop, all their ideas into some key themes and messages. And I think you'll then be going sort of on the right lines, and you should be able to keep most of the people happy most of the time. Okay, so as I said, planning is often an issue. So do your research and plan well. You've agreed you're going to build a website or update your website, or you're going to develop a password protected area for customers or suppliers. So look at what good looks like. Do your research. What have other people done? Speak to people who have successfully delivered one of these projects where you can. Speak to suppliers. Do some web research. Look at best practice. There are lots of awards out there. Who's produced really great websites. I'm not saying you're going to be able to afford all of those, but look at what good looks like and take some ideas from those, and think about what might work for your industry, for your brand, and then invest some time in finding a supplier. And while recommendations are great, it's not always the nirvana. Think about who's going to be the supplier that's going to be able to work with you, really deliver your goals. You might have a certain budget and you might want bargain basement, but can they deliver your goals? You might need to scale up, look for somewhere in the middle, and think about the compromise that I talked about, and get someone who can really understand you, to take the time to invest in your business, and help you to deliver a real sort of a real outcome for your brand, something that you're proud of, something that customers are going to relate to, and something that's going to help to drive your business forward. And then when you've done that, you need to set a realistic budget. You probably have an idea of what it costs, but once you've spoken to suppliers, you're going to get a much better idea. You might have to go back and ask for more money, or you might have to have another conversation with those suppliers and say, this is what I've got, what can we achieve with that? And once you're happy with the supplier, agree key milestones and how the project's going to run. And then I would say it's really important to have a joint client project team, so that you're involved all the way, so that you're there to have regular conversations, to give input, to think about issues that arise, to review content. And most importantly, don't assume that you've appointed a supplier and assume the website's going to get done by itself. I mean, lots of people do that, but be clear about what you want. Be focused on the project, setting aside time, and then listen to what the experts are telling you, listen to what your supplier's telling you, take advice, think about it, make decisions, but all the time be in control, take charge of the project, really own it. And I think you'll be much happier with the outcome. I'm talking about all these sort of negatives, but I have to say, I've worked on a lot of really successful website projects, and they are the things that made them successful. They were the key. So if you can use at least one or two of those, then I think you're setting yourself up for a really strong project, and also a supplier that you can talk to. Because if they're going to give you honest advice and say, look, this isn't going to work. I know you love it, but it's not going to work. This will work for you. and then you can come to a compromise with them. A lot of this is about compromise, if I'm honest. Okay, so finally, I'll stop warbling. Your website should be a key tool for promoting your business, whatever its intended purpose. It needs to be representative of your brand, and really appeal to your customer base both now and in the future. So you need to think about, who your customers are now and who they're likely to be and the sort of people you're targeting. And sometimes you have a range of customers. So what you need to think about is how you're going to appeal to that broad base. I'm not going to cover what I've already covered. When the site eventually launches, I think that's the beginning rather than the end. There's so much to do. It's the next phase. You need to consider how to drive traffic to the site, sort of search engine optimization. You need to keep the content up to date so that it feels fresh and new all the time. And of course, there'll be the odd tweaks that you want to do, and think about other ways to drive traffic to the site. It might be social media, whatever works for your company and what works for your brand. You've got a website, and once your website's up, you want to ensure that you're getting the best value from it. So really use it. And then, of course, your website's going to need, the occasional facelift and tweak, but it doesn't have to be a big job. If you do a good job sort of once every sort of 4 or 5 years, you don't need to do a massive job unless you've got a major rebrand on your hands. Okay, so they're my tips. We will take questions at the end. I'm going to hand over to Matt now. He's going to talk about some specific case studies and give you some of his tips.
Thanks, Justine. I thought I'd tackle this from the kind of delivery part of a successful website project, looking at it from the agency side, but I think the tips are relevant to all stakeholders within a project. So we'll start with, so I thought I'd just take you through a couple of case studies that we have. I won't talk about the technical challenges, but more about the delivery challenges, the problems we had, or the challenge we faced when actually delivering the project. So if we look at the Bucks Fire and Rescue Service as a first case study, the challenges here were that the fire service had a lot of stakeholders, internal, external, including the general public. Everybody wanted a bit of ownership. Everyone wanted a voice and an opinion that needed to be heard. Really wanted a sense that the website was fulfilling their requirements, which often department to department could be a very, very different requirement. So how do we resolve these challenges? Firstly, we looked to engage with everybody. We created internal and external surveys. We held workshops and really kind of gave the stakeholders a voice. We set up strong project management tools and processes from the off. That was ensuring kind of that we had regular kind of sprint reviews, sprint meetings. We had a very strict feedback process to kind of minimize scope creep, which is something that absolutely can occur when you have a lot of stakeholders in a project, as Justine alluded to earlier on with the too many cooks comment. So we had to really drive people. It was a strict budget, strict delivery timelines. So we had to really drive the disciplines of feedback and amends loops. But I think the key thing with the fire service was in the successful delivery of this project was becoming part of their team. It was really, our team really kind of immersed themselves in the fire service. Really kind of strive to kind of understand the culture internally, and so that it really felt that as I said, we were part of the team, and we could kind of understand each different department within the fire service. And then moving on to the next case study, which is again another public sector case study, and this had challenges for a different reason, in that it was another project with multiple stakeholders. But the stakeholders were slightly different this time, in that we had the internal stakeholders driving the project. We had a very, very strict public sector IT department to work with. And we also had third-party agencies who were in part of the project on a wider basis, as well as an incumbent agency that we were working with as well. We were integrating with pre-existing technology, and our part of the project was actually only one part of a much wider project. So how could we successfully deliver our part of the project whilst not being affected by the wider project, and also assisting the client to deliver those areas of the project too? So the key thing with this project was communication. Absolutely right from the off, we had to establish a process for regular communications with all stakeholders, but without prohibiting the delivery. Some stakeholders were purely technology, some stakeholders were content, some were finance. So it was choosing, setting up a process that enabled us to interact with the right stakeholders at the right time, and not end up with too many meetings in the diary and impacting our final delivery. I think absolutely key with this project was establishing a good relationship with the incumbent agency and the third-party agencies. We've worked on projects with the external agencies regularly in our history, and sometimes you work very positively with an agency. Sometimes you have to, it can be a little bit more pragmatic. But I have to say, in this case, it was absolutely key that it was a positive relationship, and we were able to achieve that. And then I think one of the other things we were able to do is when we looked at the start of the project and looked at establishing project management tools and different applications that we like to run our projects via. We actually took a step back and looked at the wider project and integrated with their project management tools using things like Microsoft Teams, which we hadn't traditionally used before. But again, it was being used on a wider project, so why add another application to the mix? So we flexed our processes and our approach and fit into a much wider project. And then finally, I just wanted to cover off Justin, if you can move to the next slide for me. Yeah. So I just want this is all sounds really, really simple. Kind of my tips for delivering your website project successfully. I think it all seems very simple, and it is. The complexity is keeping it simple throughout the project and not straying from your processes. I think it's absolutely key on all website projects to get an alignment of expectations right from the start. If possible, highlight project risks so that you and the client and the stakeholders involved in the project are aware of the risks, and you can mitigate those risks often as you go. I think setting up and utilizing good project management tools right from the start is also key. Use the tools. There's many tools out there. Pick and choose the ones that work for a specific project, and again, don't be afraid to change on a per project basis. Pick the tool that works for that project. I think tracking kind of miscellaneous requests is a slightly left field one, but I think it's really key certainly on a website project. Is that as you go through a project, you often pick up little bits of, oh, could we do this? And it'd be great if it did that, and it'd be great if it did this. And often you either find yourself ignoring them, or you get into a huge kind of scope creep, and that can absolutely kill a project. So I think it's a matter. I think key to kind of track those requests and those little kind of things that you typically happen at the end of the meeting, where somebody says, "Oh, it would be really helpful if it did this." Track those requests. Keep that on a project board somewhere that is constantly reviewed throughout the project, and making sure that everybody's comfortable with what is and isn't in scope. And if you do need to bring something in scope that wasn't before, then you can realign your delivery goals to cope with that. Clear communications is as simple as it sounds. I think communicating clearly with your client and being honest and open and transparent as to how the project is going is absolutely key, and keeps everybody's expectations on the same page. And then finally, just believe in your process. If you've delivered successfully in the past, then believe in those processes and those approaches that you've taken before. Whilst it's always great to review your processes and review the tools you use, don't fix what isn't broken. And if you've had success in delivering a project before, then believe in your process. And whilst every project that I've been involved with in my career does invariably have its challenges, if you stick to your goals and say believe in your process, and essentially you'll get the same result. And that's me.
Lovely, thanks, Matt. We're happy to take questions if you have any. You should be able to see them, I hope, on the chat. While we're waiting for questions, because they do sometimes take a little while to come up. What's your favourite project you've ever worked on, Matt? Have you got one?
There's too many. To be honest with you, the local government social care ombudsman was great. It was a public sector tender win, so that's good. We were up against a lot of competition, so it was great to be selected. The team themselves were a great client to work with, and continue to be a great client to work with. We overcome a lot of technical challenges, and again, it's working in the social care sector, which was a new one for us. And so yeah, that would probably be my current favourite.
Yeah, I think my favourite would be a client portal that I built. I didn't build it, but I was working with an agency, and I had total autonomy. My stakeholders were really well behaved, and they agreed with everything that I put forward. Project went live, it was smooth. That was one of the easier projects. I mean, it was a lot of hard work, don't get me wrong, the whole planning and the customer experience and mapping the journey out. But for me, that was probably the best, just because it was quite smooth, and we achieved our vision, and the client feedback was really positive. Right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions. We've obviously answered all the questions. I'll say thank you to everyone who's joined. We will have this recorded and live on LinkedIn from sometime tomorrow. And if you have any questions, you can reach us at the lab at maglabs.net. Thanks very much. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining.